Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome with an overview of China, Captain Richard Heyman.
Thank you, Nick, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and fellow survivors at sea. Because we are sailing off directly up to Beijing and bypassing our port of Qingdao due to our unfortunate conditions, I thought I'd show you about this lovely city we're sailing past today, and then talk about a few other aspects of just China in general, because now that we've been here for our brief time, or we've come to China a number of times, you can see how this country is transforming into something that is sometimes quite unbelievable, just our little view of the small town of Shanghai. Now, Qingdao is a small city of only about 8 million, and but it has been famous as sort of the northern resort town of North China, because it's out on the peninsula, and it has been a place where the northern Chinese traditionally have come for holidays to this day. So I'm going to show you some things that we won't get to see this trip around, and then perhaps another cruise or another time you can come to this particular town of Qingdao. Well, this is a city that is on the ocean, and it's as you can tell where we have, oh, sorry, I just stepped on something. No, there we go. It's all magic. Well, no, that was last night. Anyway, we are sailing right up this coast out of the Yangtze River and up off into the Yellow Sea to this peninsula in the province is called Shandong, which means the Eastern Mountain. And that is an area of the arm of the East China Sea that goes up to the Bohai Sea, and we will be sailing around the peninsula right up into the port of Tianjin. Now, this is a kind of a bounded sea that is very shallow. I think I showed this to you before, that it is surrounded by Korea, the Liaoning Peninsula, and Shandong, where we are right now. This is a sea that's always been called the Yellow Sea, even in Chinese, because as you can see out your cabin and the off deck, it's very yellow from all of the rivers that pour into it. We are still within the Yangtze River delta flow, such that there's some 200 million tons of silt a year that pours out into the East China Sea here. And that is increasing the land going out into the sea by about 3 centimeters a year, but of course it gets washed back and forth by the tide and typhoons. But as we come up into this part of the Yellow Sea near Shandong, there's a great northern monsoon, or winds just that blow. Dust from the Gobi Desert comes pouring off onto the sea, and then through much of the winter it's covered with this fine dust that then settles and then gives it this sort of cappuccino flavor, color all through the year. That also means it's very rich in minerals for marine life, and it's mostly a flat sandy bottom, so there's a lot of ground fish and crustaceans and all kinds of other creatures, and it's again very productive fishing grounds. Now, here's one of the fishermen out there wondering where the storm went. When we come out to Shandong, there are a lot of islands around it, and it's very rocky coast and variegated, so that's also why it has a lot of good fisheries, including abalone and things like this are a delicacy up in this part of North China and the Yellow Sea. These are all inhabited mostly, or in this case, around near Shandong, here's a big wind farm, there's a lot of communications, and this is an area where there's been battles in the past, but the Chinese Navy is based in Qingdao. Now here's where the city itself is located. It's on a bay called Jiaoao, which is then the city itself is out on the tip of a peninsula. It's very mountainous, though. This is a mountainous county or province of China. It's also happens to be the birthplace of Taoism, and also Confucianism had some of their original temples in this area, including Laoshan, which has a Taoist temple complex in the mountains just north of the city. Well, even though we're not going there, I'm going to show you how it is laid out with 8 beaches down on rocky points, and then residential areas and overlook. So it's a very beautiful scenic city, always considered the most pleasant of Chinese cities. It's not that polluted, has fresh air, has nice beaches, it has beautiful houses, and but it's not very old as a city itself, because it was just a fishing village until 1891. It was made a Chinese Navy base. But it became a city when it was considered that it was such a good harborage, and it was also out to sea, that beyond the local fishing, it would have an attraction for particularly foreigners to build houses away from the congested and often unsanitary old Chinese cities like Beijing and Shanghai as it was growing. So Qingdao became a German city, and it was built primarily by the Germans, but along this great seashore. This guy's, I think, digging clams. And but to this day, it is a scenic icon in China. This particular Jiao Pier is the city symbol that's on the famous beer there. And then there's another little island off there called Little Qingdao, which is the symbol of the city because it has a big statue on it. But here we were last week, and we went out on the pier, and again, the place is full of visitors from all over China, mostly, because this is a primary resort. That's why it has been called the Chinese Riviera, but it's kind of somewhat isolated compared to other resort areas in China. So here's a view. They have a lot of pleasure boats and fishing and the general comfortable life along the seashore. And then it has major shipyards and industrial areas on the other parts of town. But this is the goddess of town. This is out on the little green island. It's called Tinho in Cantonese, or the Tianmu, the mother of heaven, or also known as the sea goddess. And so there are temples to her. This happens to be a modern statue for her, and I think some people have been praying to her on this trip. But these islands are scenic in the center, but then if we had come into the harbor, it would look like this, with this large industrial complex. A lot of shipbuilding goes on there. And then it is, I said, the home of the Chinese Navy in the Northern Fleet. There's other installations down in the south, but we pulled in and got to see the frigates, and then just as across from our dock, we got to admire their new submarine fleet. So this is an important strategic center for the Chinese Navy. Here's actually their headquarters up the hill. They didn't invite us in for tea. I guess we didn't have any information that they needed. But here was a guard on the ship, and everybody was trying to get him to blink or nod or smile, and he's almost like a cardboard cutout. But nonetheless, this is the welcome sometimes you get in China is an armed guard. Now, back in another century, though, this was a small fishing village which the German Navy came in and took from the Chinese. 1897, they actually landed their sea battalion of Marines and took this fort, and they decided that it would be the base for the German power in Asia. And they forced a concession from the Qing Empress Dowager. At that time, China was in chaos between warlords and then incursions, and had foreigners cutting off different limbs of the country for their own purposes, but this became the German base. So they put up the imperial flag of the Navy and then began to build a city. And this was under the commander, Admiral von Spee, after whom was named later the Great Battleship. But he was lost during World War I in a naval battle in the Pacific. But they built the city on this peninsula. They bought the land from the local farmers and fishermen and such, and built them another town outside. But then they laid out broad avenues, and they put in the first sewers and electrical lines and other modern urban conveniences in China. And they considered this as the place to live because those services were particularly lacking back in the major cities of larger population. So here's one of the old maps, 1912. This was somewhat of a brief period for the Germans because they only stayed from 1897 to the end of World War I. They were taken over by the Japanese at the end of World War I. The Japanese were allied with the British in World War I, by the way. But anyway, this city was built on a German plan with the architecture which it remains to this day. So I have a few old views of it that just show you how it was sort of came up from just a countryside or a fishing village to this elegant German-style resort town. Now this is one of the many beaches that are still there, and many of the houses are still there, but of course now it's a very major big city. I'll show you how it's grown around this original old German center. The downtown streets still have names in German, and a lot of the buildings still have their original architecture, though the community is mostly, of course, Chinese now. But the German position in China might have grown from this to be much larger had it not been for World War I and having lost this foothold in Asia. But it is now, these are architectural gems for the Chinese, and are now, most of them are protected from any demolition. You can see the difference between Shanghai, where there's so much tremendous commercial pressure on the old buildings. Qingdao has actually saved almost all of them. And so here's, for instance, the Wohnhaus der Gouverneur, that's the governor's mansion, which is up on a mountain for a signal station, and it is still there now. It's a, they call it the governor's house hotel, and you can go stay there in the former quarters. So these are very solidly built buildings in the style. Of course, the Chinese say, well, it's German architects, but we built the buildings well, and they still stand to this day. In fact, they're actually copying new ones in this style because they find it very charming. And this city has grown with a lot of new people coming in to live there because of all the new industries that have grown. But they've kept all these villas. Most of them during the Cultural Revolution were given over to work units. So almost every big ministry in Beijing had their own villa in Qingdao. And this was the site, most famously in recent political history, in 1964, the plenary meeting of the Communist Party met in Qingdao, and Peng Dehui, who was one of the leaders of the Communist Party, got up and he criticized Mao Zedong for his disastrous economic policies during the Great Leap Forward and the famines and the chaos. And he was criticized and then expelled from the party, put in prison, and that began the radicalization of the Maoists, and then led to the Red Guards and the Cultural Revolution. And it's sort of a terrible history, but it all happened on the beach here. And but Qingdao didn't get ruined like many older and parts of China, because there were not that many temples and old neighborhoods. This was sort of still a resort and still is today. So here it is. Now it has a booming center city and a whole new town further out. But the old tree-lined villas and urban European-style life goes on there. And when we were there the other day, I noticed that they're putting on placards on all the buildings that are now detailed who lived there, and they're all protected and they're being renovated and kept in good shape. But here's an example of the downtown. You have a few new blocks, and then you have the old commercial buildings. Here's the old German administrative building for the government, which is again used by the city government. Here's the railroad station. Here again this is a Lutheran church, but this is a Catholic church. This is St. Michael's Cathedral, which was built later in the 30s. Even after the World War I and through the mid-war period, there were a lot of foreigners who came to live in Qingdao just because it was a pleasant place. There was a lot of schools set up and aid programs that came out of Qingdao that would then send assistants and particularly missionaries across China until they were all later expelled. On the hills of the town, there are a lot of overlooks. Here's one they call Fish Hill, which is not an old pagoda, but they have even more modern ones up on the other hills. And they've built consciously a few Chinese-flavored buildings in the area, mostly new. But here's one of the Signal Hill above the governor's mansion. It looks like the Teletubbies to me. And but then on the north side of all this, the old town, is the whole new city, and it goes very extensive through the coastline with many new shipyards and factories. It's a home of, for instance, Haier Appliances, which are now internationally marketed houseware appliances. Is based here. They also have major medical factories and national electronics centers. So they build a lot of things on the outside of this big city. This is in the new side. That's a science center, exhibition center. But like most of China, there's suddenly this tremendous mushroom of construction. But still, most people come there to go to the beach. So this is probably the busiest beach city in all of China. The south coast is usually rocky. This has beautiful big sand beaches that stretch all around the city. And so when we were there the other day, it was nice and warm, and we took a walk. They've connected all of the beaches with walkways, so you can stroll. You don't have to go into town. You can walk right under the villas and walk all around. The new town, though, has become a showcase because it was the site of the part of the Beijing Olympics in 2008. So they dressed up the whole waterfront with sculptures like this. And so you have both the old and the new, just sort of like Shanghai, except this town is not nearly as gigantic nor congested as Shanghai. And then, of course, it's not on a river. Has beaches all through the downtown area. But like Shanghai was for the Expo, this town and Beijing were dressed up for the Olympics, and so the pride of the nation in many ways. So they built this Olympic water sports center in Qingdao. This is for sailing, rowing, windsurfing, whatever, sunbathing. I don't know what they have in the Olympics anymore, but that all happened in Qingdao. And this is the new harbor where they have fleets of boats, and then this tremendous walkway out onto the sea for the viewing of the Olympic races. And they have that there still under this flag parade, the torch for the Olympics. Now there was one in Beijing, but they put one up here. And this is sort of a symbol of the town now, this tremendous torch. And then, but if you look around, you get around the back, it actually looks like a traditional Chinese scroll. You could almost open it up, but it's just the symbol of the games. So they've finished all this architecture and centers for the Olympics, but like the Expo, they will remain as the pride of the city. And then they also built a lot of waterfront villas. So this whole new area of what they call the North Town has a lot of sort of Riviera style housing, I'd call it. And a lot of people who come there either on holiday or they're still work units in other parts of China will come there and have their representatives have a week or so in the villas on the beaches, and then they go around town. Now this is a curious bicycle because it looks like there's about 6 people on it. It's a very green city, so even the police have electric vehicles. So I think can catch the bicyclist, but anybody else can get away maybe. But it's a very pleasant town, very, very lovely town in the old town. And then the new town is again these great towers of glass, and you sort of wonder, are they going to ever fill all these up? Because this is tremendous construction, and one of the problems of China is they've built so many housing units and also office units that most of them are still empty, and the prices are high, but nobody's buying. And we have real estate speculation that we may know of where we come from, but in China, it's often the local government or state corporations who are leading it, and then they have state credit, and so it's the country's gone from what they used to call the Iron Rice Bowl, which was the guaranteed food for everybody. Now they have what I call the Iron Real Estate Bubble, because they keep building, and everybody wonders if it'll ever pop, but then it's all backed by the government. All land in China is owned by the government. And all use of it is leased out to individuals or corporations or people, but they can build this and it can sit on their books for however long it takes to fill it up, and thereby build brand new cities and whole new sweeping areas of town on the credit of the state, and then eventually be to the benefit of the people. Well, anyway, Qingdao, like a lot of mid-sized cities, are competing with every other city in China for the newest building, the newest airport. Look at this one's built for the Olympics. Looks like a bunch of sails. And then they've fixed the waterfront. So the infrastructure investment in all of China is quite remarkable. But Qingdao is sort of its own shining example of the most pleasant of them all. Now this red sculpture is the new symbol of the city. And it goes back to the German era, because in the end of World War I, the Chinese government insisted at the Treaty of Versailles that the city of Qingdao and the province of Shandong be given back to the Chinese nation. Instead, it was given to the Japanese for their part of the Allies' victory in World War I. And so then the students in Beijing and Shanghai went out and protested on May 4th, 1919, and it became a large student uprising, very famous among the Chinese, because that was when all these new universities that had been built and a lot of foreign influence encouraged people to speak out. The students led the way to demand the ending of the foreign concessions in China. Now that did not end until the end of World War II, and then the founding of the People's Republic of China appropriated all foreign property, sent all the missionaries away. And so then it was not until 1949 that Qingdao finally was under its own administration. So this is the symbol of they call it the winds of May, but it's also the spirit of the youth that renew the culture of China. Now this is perhaps a political issue I'll talk about tomorrow. I'm going to talk about Beijing and more of the political structure of China as we're going to the capital finally. But here I'm just going to give you a view of some of the social and family life of China. We've had our brief experiences on this cruise, but I'll just show you that in the parks in Qingdao, there's always people out doing Tai Chi and walking around. It's a very pleasant city, and so there's a lot of green spaces and a lot of people having a more relaxed time than that mob we had to get through in Shanghai. But, oh, there was a lovely mob, actually. It was. Never knew you had so many new friends. But anyway, in Qingdao, you can walk around. There's sort of more room, and it's more, let's say, less congested, and people are more friendly that way. They're not getting sort of driven by the compression of a city. It's so this gentleman was practicing his sword play and Tai Chi, and then I met this guy on the shore, who is Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism. And so I asked him, "How long have you been around?" He said, "I've been around this town for 2,000 or more years." I said, "Well, how do you ever live so long?" He says, "It's my drink. You know, see, he has a gourd there. That's the elixir of longevity." And there's the eternal pear, another symbol of Taoism. And then, of course, he has the whiskers of wisdom and a great dome of knowledge that tends to get larger every 100 or 200 years. Well, anyway, I think what he was actually drinking was this, because that's what keeps me immortal. I don't know about that other stuff. And so Qingdao, as you know, is the home of the famous beer. They use the old TS instead of the Q, but it's still Qingdao, meaning the green or the lush island. And so this has now become a world famous brewery, and also led to the establishment of breweries all across China, making it the national beverage. And it's still there. When we stopped there, we would have gone on a brewery tour first thing in the morning, and it's all you could drink until 10 o'clock in the morning, right? But it's a pride again of the city, so they have an annual international beer festival. And I was told never drink that much at one go, but they have a big party with it, and it's one of the happier places, except that it can lead to this situation. I think they had too much to drink, and now they're stuck to, well, this has actually seen this around, maybe we saw it in Xiamen or Shanghai. The young couples will always go out and get formal portraits of themselves taken in rented gowns and suit like this, so that then they can send out a very fancy photo invitation to all their friends to come to the restaurant for where their wedding feast is. And then, so when we were there the other day, we saw so many of them all getting dressed up and getting their pictures taken. It's not their wedding day, it's just their marketing day where they get their photo done. And then the way that it's done in China is that at a certain age, 25 to 30, they do decide who they're going to be with for their wedding, but they work to invite as many people to come to their wedding feast, and all of the guests pay, and so the couple makes a lot of money on that wedding feast. It's a commercial transaction, so you better send out the best invitation, and you make sure everybody knows, and you see how many people you can get. So it's a curious way to do it. It's not the families that pay for the wedding, it's the guests, which makes sense to me. But here they all are out on the pier in the rocks off Qingdao getting their seaside portraits taken, and those gowns were mighty muddy by the end of the day, I imagine. But then they take them, wash them up, rent them out to a whole nother set another day. People youth come up from around North China just to Qingdao to get their wedding portraits taken, and then they'll have a big feast at a place like this fancy seafood restaurant. Now this is an example of the prosperity of China, because they've been making. The individuals may or may not make a great salary, but the collective wealth of China has gotten quite considerable, especially in these seaside cities with economic zones that are tax-free or have foreign partners and sometimes get paid a foreign salary to work in these. And so then they'll have what is now conspicuous consumption and a tremendous displays of wealth in China. Now we've already seen that in Shanghai, of course Hong Kong, and then even in a smaller city like Tianjin, they have valet parking at a large downtown department store. And this has led China to become having one of the greatest discrepancies of wealth of any other country other than that most curious country of mine, the United States. So you have some people are billionaires making great amounts of money in the enterprise in China, but you still have many, many poor people. In fact, the poorest of the Chinese are among the poorest on earth, and they're usually off in the far countryside. But then they come to the cities and they're faced with this, the display of wealth that is very un-communist, you would say, but that's the new system of China. So here you have one of the seafood restaurants having a celebration for somebody's wedding. That's the double happiness symbol of a wedding there. And but meanwhile, you have a lot of poor people who are on the outskirts of town who have come to work in construction or in other factory work. And so every city has what they call their floating population. If you are going to live in any town or city in China, you must have a registration. Call it a hukou, which if you don't have your ID card, you cannot go to the hospital, you can't send your kid to school. If the police don't like you, they will run you out of town or put you in jail. But the migrant laborers of China that are camping in the cities are estimated to be about 100 million at this point. And they expect another 100 or 200 million more to come in the next couple of decades. That's one reason they're building so much, is to keep guys like this busy who are in with no place to live, their family, or they don't have, many of these men don't have a family and have no prospects of even getting married, even if they could rent the tux. And then they are treated with great suspicion and say discrimination by the city folk who basically don't want them in town, but then they also don't mind them working for them. Sounds like other countries have that problem. So they're often a rather disgruntled bunch, but they're kept very much under control, and there's very little street crime or troubles with them because they're basically there to work. And they'll move from city to city. That's why they call them the floating population. Right now they're doing a big census of China. They're trying to determine how many people live where, and they're having a very big trouble because a lot of these especially young men don't want to reveal who they are or where they're from. So I was talking to one yesterday in Shanghai, and he was trying to sell watches, and I said, well, I don't need a watch, but where are you from? He's a farmer from Anhui, and he said that there's too many people and they cannot even feed themselves up there, and so they're all coming down to Shanghai to sell whatever they can on the street, and they're sleeping outside of town in shacks that they put up for themselves. And so you can imagine next to the wealth that's going on, guys like this sleeping in a van, just trying to survive and make enough to even go back home. A lot of them just don't know what to do because there's too many people in the countryside, and then they'll never attain the wealth to have the comforts that they see displayed, especially in the media. So this sort of rising expectation is a big problem socially in China. Most people in the cities will have a government-built and often government-owned flat apartment, and then have some either market job if they don't have a regular salary job. So you see in all of the smaller cities especially, a lot of country people selling different things they bring in. Here's a market in a back alleyway next to that great department store in Qingdao. And so this is a typical scene. They have seafood they're preparing. There's a lot of life on the street in these old market towns of China. But this fellow, for instance, probably saw the Japanese attack, he saw the Civil War, he saw the Red Guards, and now he's seeing the parade of new China going by, and I can't imagine what he'd have to say about it except, what a movie. And you see a lot of elderly who are retired, and they get if they got a pension, they have a fairly good life. Maybe they don't have much spending money, but they will have medical care, and usually 80% of their salary is paid to them. And so they have a lot of leisure time. This guy's raising birds. This guy I met at a market there, and he had little gung fu swords in his hand. He came and he acted like he was the butcher in the shop, and he was going to cut me to pieces. And then he went, I showed you, didn't I? And I went, oh, now I'm ready for you next time. But he was a very merry fellow. And then on another corner, we saw this guy who's obviously seems homeless. He seems like he's living on this couch. But like a lot of Chinese, they're very much involved in their literary culture. So he's reading this book, which looks like it's about 2,000 pages long. And I wanted to talk to him. He wouldn't budge from his the end of the thriller. But that's the life of China. It's many different people in many ways. We went on a home visit there with Miss Yang, who the tour agency in smaller cities will arrange this. The people in Shanghai or Beijing are too busy for it. But in a smaller city, they'll take you to show you a house. So here's Miss Young and her husband, who is a manager at a hotel. That's their one son who graduated and then ended up going as a cadet to the Chinese Air Force Academy. And they were very, very proud of him. They were so proud they got out of a wedding dress to have a picture taken. But anyway, then this is the room they live in, this walk-up, 4-story walk-up. And of course it was all neat and tidy for us to visit, but fairly simple but fairly comfortable habitation for these people. And a lot of this is, let's say, state guaranteed. This is the government building. If you go by in Beijing, you'll say, well, this says, warmly celebrate the 60th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. And then it has the government offices there. But if you ever see red placards like that, that means it's a Communist Party unit offices. And they are, of course, they've built themselves the finest of offices now. But when I was looking at that, I said, well, gee, what are these people doing? And I got closer and I saw, well, there's a lady shopping, and then there's a gentleman with a little kid. And so I caught him a little unawares. He didn't know I was peeping like that. But notice he's probably the grandfather with his grandchild there. But you see the kid has the split pants. You may have noticed this in China, that they keep the bottoms open and then will hold them over the curb. Until recently, they would never use diapers because that was this terrible thing you do to a baby that gives them a rash. They're terribly uncomfortable. But above all, the kids don't communicate if they have diapers. But a Chinese baby with open pants like that will begin to speak, and they'll get toilet trained in a matter of months rather than how long have our kids been in diapers? I don't want to know. But anyway, here's the very typical case of the elder generation taking care of the single kid who is cared for by 4 grand elders, and then 2 parents are off working usually. And so these kids are, of course, the upending of the social pyramid, where it used to be there were you had as many kids as possible so that the subsequent generations would support the few elders who back in the old days had no pensions or anything like that. So you see this a lot. These little kids have been called like in the solar system, there's the sun in the center, which is the baby. And then around that rotates the immediate parents, and then the grandparents are going around. But the little kid is the most important thing in their life, and that often means that they're terribly spoiled. The school teachers will say these kids are almost impossible to tell what to do because they've never had anybody tell them no. And so it is a social tremendous change for China and been much debated. Here's another street scene of this guy who was having an argument with this woman. I don't know what they're talking about. The dog. Maybe it's who's going to walk the dog, and it looks like they just got out of their bed. But a lot of people don't have children. Their children are away, and so dogs have become, as in many other places, the object of affection. And so even though they were traditionally raised for food, now these little pet dogs are everywhere in all the cities. But even some of the young people now are maybe don't have any brothers, sisters, uncles, cousins, aunts, or any of that. And now that some of them don't even want to have children on their own at all, because here are a couple of young school teachers I was talking to, and they were saying, well, we don't even know if we want to get married because that's too much trouble. We just sort of like to be ourselves. So this is sort of where the family in China it's atomized down to the individual level in a society that was traditionally completely communal and collective. Now they're still cooperative with themselves and the unit, and they have a strong Confucian background, but this is sort of the future of Chinese youth, not just drinking Pepsi-Cola, but having let's say, a modern life that is actually broken free of some of those traditional bounds. And I will just stop here to tell you, in contrast, there's it's said that the women of China have become endowed with their equal rights. It was one of the first laws of the National Congress in 1950 was to give women all equal legal rights for property or for jobs and for divorce rights, things like that, medical care. But of course that goes against the old Confucian patriarchy, but there's an old story about the farmer who comes back to his house and he stopped by at the tea house. He's had a little rice wine, and he comes in, and his wife said, "Did you finish planting the rice today?" He said, "Oh, I'll do it tomorrow. I was talking to my friends." And she said, "You know, good for nothing husband, you're always lazy, and you're on, you should get the beating you deserve." And she picks up a kitchen spoon, starts chasing him around the kitchen, and he runs in the next room, and he goes and jumps under the bed. And then the wife says, "Come out and get the beating you deserve." And the man says, "Woman, I'm the man of the house, and I will not come out and get the beating I deserve." It's a joke. It's only a joke. But nowadays the men consider themselves this secondary to the women, and above all, in service to the one child. And so will be seen in the future how this changes the society. But already the demographics say that China will rapidly age without that many young people to support the older generations. But nonetheless, they still expect about 200 to 300 million more people in the country within the next 3 generations, just because there are so many. And out in the countryside, the one-child policy is not being observed in many places. They pay the fine, or they know the officials, and they just continue to try to have kids. Often they want to have boys. But anyway, this whole problem leads back to the spirit of the youth that is historic in China and is a real challenge for the nation and then the rest of the world. But even though we didn't get to Qingdao, I hope you can appreciate some of its beauty and curiosity, and maybe another time we can go back and see that seaside resort and go sailing even. This is, of course, a sport that is quite rare to the Chinese. I can't imagine why anybody would go out on a boat in the ocean for fun. But anyway, some days it's better than others. And I hope you get back, and next time, welcome to Qingdao. Thank you very much, and have a good day.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I heard some time ago that